Ever feel like you're playing a game, but you don't quite know all the rules? You follow the advice, you work hard, you save your money, you diligently put some aside for retirement, and yet somehow it feels like you're running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. The cost of a home, your weekly groceries, sending your kids to college, everything seems to be pulling away, just out of reach. That feeling of quiet anxiety isn't just in your head. It's a reality for millions. Governments and our financial leaders love to talk about your financial freedom. They use reassuring words like stability, growth, and opportunity. But what if the system wasn't actually built for your freedom? What if that feeling of running in place isn't an accident, but a feature? If you look closely at history, not just the dates and wars, but the financial history, you see a much different story. It's a story of hidden financial tricks used by governments for centuries to quietly channel wealth and consolidate power. The shocking part isn't just that these tricks exist, it's that they are the same tricks, recycled over and over. They're just wrapped in new, more complex language for each new era. And in this video, we're going to peel back that wrapping. This isn't about some grand conspiracy theory. This is about understanding incentives. We're going to look at the patterns that financial historians and political economists have identified for generations. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand the real rules of the game, you can finally start to make different choices. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick in the book: inflation. When a government wants to spend more money than it can raise through taxes, it faces a very difficult choice. It can be honest and openly raise taxes, which is politically toxic. Nobody wins an election by promising that. Or it can do something much, much quieter. It can simply create more money. It can debase the currency. Ancient Rome mastered this. In the 3rd century, emperors facing massive military payrolls and costly wars started clipping coins, or more often mixing cheaper metals like copper into the silver denarius. A coin that was once nearly pure silver eventually became a copper slug with just a thin, deceptive silver wash. The empire pretended it was the same coin with the same value, but the shopkeeper, the baker, and the soldier knew the truth. What happened? The predictable result: inflation skyrocketed. People's savings, often stored in those very coins, evaporated. Wages couldn't keep up. It was a silent, devastating tax on everyone who held and trusted that money. This isn't just ancient history. This is the blueprint for modern central banking. Today, we don't clip coins. We have quantitative easing, expanding the monetary base, or asset purchase programs. The language is sterile and academic, but the principle is identical. And modern economists have a precise name for why this is a wealth transfer: the Cantillon Effect, named after the 18th century Franco-Irish economist Richard Cantillon. He observed that when new money is created, it doesn't spread evenly through the economy like water over a field. It injects at a specific point. The people closest to that money printer, which today means major banks, the government itself, and those who own the financial assets that central banks buy, get to spend that new money first. They spend it at its current value before prices have adjusted. By the time that new money filters down to the average person, perhaps as a small wage increase, the prices of housing, stocks, and education have already been bid up. You just get the higher prices. They got the purchasing power. It's the Roman trick, digitized and scaled. You can see the endgame of this policy in countries like Turkey or Argentina, where ordinary citizens desperately flee their own currency for US dollars, gold, or crypto, just to find a safe place to store their life's work. The Middle Ages brought a more direct approach: forced loans. Monarchs in England, France, and Spain would routinely ask wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown for wars or palaces. Of course, this wasn't an ask. Refusing meant impossible fines, confiscation of property, or worse. Repayment, if it ever came, was often decades late or paid in the new debased currency. The trick was simple: coercion disguised as patriotism. You might think this is long gone, but modern political economists see echoes of this in what's called financial repression. This is when governments use regulations to subtly force domestic institutions, like your pension fund or local banks, to buy government bonds at very low interest rates, often below the real rate of inflation. It's not a loan at the point of a sword, but it's a forced allocation of your retirement savings into an asset that is guaranteed to lose purchasing power. It's a polite way to fund government spending at the expense of savers. By the 17th century, the entire system became the trick. When the Bank of England was created in 1694, it wasn't a public service. The government needed a flood of cash to fight wars against France. So a deal was struck. A group of wealthy investors would buy government bonds, lend money to the crown, and in return the government would guarantee their interest payments using tax revenue. Think about who paid those taxes. It wasn't just the wealthy bondholders, it was ordinary people, through duties on everything from salt to beer to cloth. This created a powerful, permanent new dynamic. 1. The wealthy lent money to the government and earned secure, risk-free interest. 2. The poor and working class paid taxes to the government. 3. The government then transferred that tax money to the wealthy as interest. This was a perfect wealth transfer machine, all under the respectable new name of national finance. This is the bedrock of our modern financial world. The safest investment on earth is lending money to a powerful government precisely because its returns are guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the entire population. This has a massive impact on our lives. It creates a risk-free rate that shapes all other investments. It also creates a powerful incentive for the government to keep borrowing. And as the debate around modern monetary theory, MMT, shows, the conversation has shifted. The focus is less on how do we pay for this, and more on we can just create the money to service the debt. This isn't about whether that theory is right or wrong. It's about seeing the incentive. The system is designed to perpetuate debt because that debt is a source of secure, guaranteed profit for those at the top, funded by everyone else. Fast forward to the world we live in, and these tricks are everywhere, just wearing modern-day camouflage. Let's talk about deficit spending. When politicians want to build a new project, fund a social program, or cut taxes, they often don't have the money on hand, so they borrow it. They run a deficit, issuing bonds that are bought by investors, banks, and other countries. We're told this is investment. It's for new highways, better schools, or stimulating the economy. But have you ever looked around at the crumbling infrastructure and wondered, where did all that money go? A significant portion of that investment funnels into defense contracts, corporate subsidies, and yes, interest payments to those who already own the debt. But here's the real trick. Political economists, like the Nobel laureate James Buchanan, called this fiscal illusion. It's a psychological sleight of hand. When the government builds a new hospital with tax money, you feel the cost immediately in your paycheck. It's visible and painful. But when they build it with debt, the benefit is immediate and the cost is hidden. It's pushed onto future taxpayers, who will have to pay the interest and principal for decades. Or, even more invisibly, it's paid by all of us through the silent tax of inflation when the central bank steps in to buy that debt. This illusion makes government spending seem cheaper than it really is, allowing it to grow relentlessly. We see the new bridge, but we don't see the multi-generational mortgage attached to it. The trick is that the debt looks like it's for the people, but the burden lands on their shoulders, while the guaranteed profits go to the bondholders. This isn't just a Western phenomenon. Look at the Belt and Road Initiative. Nations across Asia and Africa accepted massive loans for infrastructure, but many are now finding themselves in a debt trap where the financial and political cost, often including control of the assets themselves, is far higher than they were led to believe. The principle is the same. Debt is used as a tool of power. Now let's talk about the trick that defined a generation. Bailouts. Think back to 2008. The entire global financial system was on the brink of collapse. Why? Because major banks had taken massive, reckless bets, bundling toxic mortgages into complex securities they sold around the world, all while knowing the true risk. When the house of cards began to fall, who paid the price? We did. Ordinary taxpayers through massive government bailouts. The justification, we were told, was that these banks were too big to fail. We had to save the system. But what system did we save? The very banks that caused the crisis emerged from the ashes bigger, more powerful, and more concentrated than before. This is the ultimate trick. Privatize the gains, socialize the losses. This introduces a devastating economic concept called moral hazard. When you know you will be rescued from your failures, you have a powerful incentive to take even bigger, more reckless risks in the future. The 2008 bailout didn't just fix the problem, it guaranteed the problem would happen again because the incentive structure was left in place. We saw this again in 2020. During the pandemic, governments stepped in with trillions of dollars. Some of it went to people, absolutely. But a huge portion went to prop up corporations, airlines, and cruise lines, many of which had spent the previous decade using their profits on stock buybacks instead of building a rainy day fund. The average person got a check. Entire industries got a blank check, financed by public debt. The losses were socialized and the subsequent profits were privatized. But perhaps the most personal, most emotionally potent trick is the one being played on our future: pensions and retirement. In countries all over the world, the United States, Britain, Germany, Japan, generations of workers have paid into government-managed systems like Social Security. We trust that the money will be there for us when we retire. It is the very definition of a social contract. Here is the uncomfortable truth most governments won't tell you. There is no lockbox. In most pay-as-you-go systems, the money you pay in today isn't saved or invested for your retirement. It's spent immediately to pay for current retirees. In its place, the government leaves an IOU, a promise that future taxpayers will pay your benefits when your time comes. For a long time, this worked, but it's not a savings plan. It's a generational transfer, and it only works as long as there are many more workers paying in than there are retirees taking out. This system is now colliding with a mathematical certainty: demographics. We are living longer and birth rates are falling. Economists call this the rising dependency ratio. In Japan and across much of Europe, this ratio is already at a breaking point. In the US and China, it's not far behind. There simply aren't enough new workers to pay the promises made to the old. So what does the government do when the math fails? It reforms the system. And reform is the code word for 1. Raising the retirement age, making you work longer. 2. Reducing your benefits, paying you less. 3. Or, the old favorite, inflating away the value of those benefits so your check buys less and less each year. This is a quiet, slow-motion default on a promise wrapped in the official language of fiscal responsibility. Notice the pattern in these three tricks: deficits, bailouts, and pensions. In every single case, the true cost is hidden and delayed. It's pushed onto the future, onto the young, or spread so thinly across the entire population through inflation that no one can point to the exact moment they were robbed. It's a system designed to look like stability while functioning as a continuous, quiet transfer of wealth and security away from you. But as powerful as those old tricks are, the modern versions are infinitely more sophisticated. They're quieter, faster, and hidden behind layers of academic jargon and digital complexity. Let's start with the big one, a term most people had never heard of before 2008, quantitative easing, or QE. When the financial system was on the verge of collapse, central banks around the world, led by the U.S. Federal Reserve, stepped in. The official story was that they needed to provide liquidity to stabilize markets and prevent a second Great Depression. The way they did this was, essentially, by creating trillions of dollars out of thin air and using that new money to buy financial assets, primarily government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, from the big banks. We were told this was a temporary emergency measure, but it wasn't. It became a decade-long policy, and it worked. But who did it work for? When all that new money flooded into the financial system, it had to go somewhere. It didn't go into your paycheck or your savings account. It went into the assets that the wealthy overwhelmingly own. The stock market soared to record highs. Real estate prices, especially in major cities, detached from reality. Fine art, classic cars, luxury watches, everything investable went vertical. This isn't a theory, it's a documented fact. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS, the central bank for central banks, has published extensive research showing how these unconventional monetary policies directly fuel asset price inflation and dramatically worsen wealth inequality. This is the Cantillon Effect on steroids, and it has a profound, painful impact on your life. If you are a young person trying to buy your first home, you are experiencing this trick firsthand. You are trying to save cash, a currency that is being intentionally devalued, to buy an asset that is being artificially inflated by this very policy. It feels impossible because the game is rigged. You are running up a down escalator, and the speed just got turned up. Then there is the trick of stealth taxation. Politicians know that raising your income tax is the quickest way to get voted out of office. It's visible, it's painful, and it's personal. So they tax you in ways you're less likely to notice. They use sales taxes or value-added taxes, which you pay a little bit at a time on everything you buy. They use fuel duties, sin taxes, and property taxes that creep up every single year, just slowly enough that you don't revolt. Look at a country like Japan. The government has been terrified to raise income taxes, but it has successfully hiked its national consumption tax multiple times. This is a regressive tax. It hits the poor and middle class the hardest because they are forced to spend a much larger percentage of their income on basic survival. But the most powerful stealth tax of all, as we've seen, is inflation. When prices rise faster than your wages, that gap is the tax. You may have gotten a 3% raise last year, but if your personal inflation rate, your rent, your food, your insurance, went up by 7%, you didn't get a raise. You took a 4% pay cut. Governments love this. First, it pushes you into higher tax brackets without anyone having to vote for it. This is called bracket creep. Second, and most importantly, it quietly reduces the real value of that mountain of debt they've accumulated. They borrowed invaluable 2015-era dollars, and they get to pay it back in weaker, less valuable 2025-era dollars. It's a slow, silent default on their obligations, and you pay the price with your diluted savings. Next, we have a trick that sounds like it should be the solution: regulation. On the surface, regulations are meant to protect us: financial rules, consumer protections, safety standards. But as political economists have shown for decades, a process called regulatory capture almost always takes place. This is the theory, most famously advanced by Nobel laureate George Stigler, that industries don't always fight regulation. They often acquire it. They use their immense lobbying power and influence to help write the rules. Why? To create barriers that keep smaller competitors out and lock in their own profits. We saw this in the 19th century with railroads, in the 20th with oil, and today it's the domain of finance and big tech. Remember the 2008 crisis? The credit rating agencies giving AAA ratings to toxic junk were being paid by the banks that created those products. That is the definition of capture. Today, just look at the revolving door in Washington, Brussels, or London. Regulators leave their government jobs and walk into multi-million-dollar positions on the boards of the very companies they were just overseeing. The incentive is not to be a tough referee. The incentive is to prove you're a team player, to secure your future payday. The public sees protection. The insiders see a protected path to profit. And let's not forget war finance. This is an old trick in new clothes. During World War I and II, governments issued war bonds, telling citizens it was their patriotic duty to buy them. And people did, believing they were supporting their nation. But these bonds also became lucrative, risk-free investments for the wealthy and the banks, all guaranteed by the future taxes of the entire population. In the 21st century, the pattern continues. The Costs of War project at Brown University has tracked the astronomical expense of the post-9/11 conflicts. The total, including interest on the debt we've taken on, will run into the trillions for decades to come. This was all financed through debt, benefiting a small number of defense contractors, financiers, and bondholders, while the cost is passed on to taxpayers who had no say in the matter. The trick is always the same: present the war as a temporary emergency, but make the financial burden permanent. Finally, there is the simplest and most effective trick of all: complexity as camouflage. Why is the U.S. tax code over 70,000 pages long? Why are budgets filled with incomprehensible jargon? Why are financial instruments so complex that even professionals struggle to explain them? Because you cannot resist what you do not understand. Complexity creates an environment where ordinary citizens cannot track how their money is flowing. An average person takes the standard deduction. A billionaire or a multinational corporation hires an army of lawyers and accountants to navigate those 70,000 pages and find the loopholes purposefully written into them. The result, as economists like Thomas Piketty have shown, is that in many cases, the effective tax rate paid by the ultra-wealthy is lower than that paid by their own staff. In ancient Rome, the debased coin was a physical sign of the trick. Today, the trick is buried in a PDF file, thousands of pages long, under an acronym you've never heard of. But the result is identical. The transfer of wealth proceeds, completely unnoticed by the public. So why does this all matter? Why dig up Roman coins and 17th century banking charters? Because that feeling I mentioned at the beginning, that feeling of running as hard as you can just to stay in the same place, is not a personal failure. It is a systemic feature. The tricks are alive and accelerating. Inflation is quietly, persistently eating away at your savings. The mountain of public debt is a mortgage on your family's future. Bailouts have become the default reflex, reinforcing the idea that some are too big to fail, while the rest of us are on our own. And the unconventional monetary policies of the last 2 decades have pushed stocks and real estate to levels that feel completely disconnected from the daily reality of wages. It's a system that, through its very design, subtly punishes savers and rewards those with the most debt and the most assets. And here is the harsh, but ultimately hopeful truth. History shows this playbook has always worked. It works not because people are foolish, but because the system is designed to be complex, opaque, and wrapped in the language of patriotism and stability. It relies on our quiet trust and our inattention. Most people take inflation as a natural part of life, like the weather. They see taxes as inevitable. They see bailouts as acts of necessity. They believe the messaging because studying economic history is frankly hard. But that ignorance, that is the most powerful trick of all, and it's the one trick you have total control over. Financial education is resistance. Understanding economic history is your map. When you know the playbook, you are infinitely harder to manipulate. This knowledge isn't meant to make you angry or cynical. It's meant to make you calm and realistic. It frees you from that nagging anxiety of what am I doing wrong, and empowers you to start asking the right question. How is this game actually being played? So here are the key lessons to take away from centuries of financial history. First, always look past the headline. When a government announces a new stimulus program, ask the 2 questions that cut through all the noise. Cui bono? Who benefits? And who will ultimately pay for this? When you see inflation rising, remember it is not just bad luck. It is a policy that transfers wealth from savers to debtors. Second, build real resilience outside the traps. In a world where currency can be created from nothing, you need to think about real value. For some, that's assets that can't be easily inflated away. But for all of us, it means investing in our own skills, our health, and our community. Your human capital, your ability to learn, adapt, and provide value, is an asset that no central bank can debase. And third, never assume the system works for you just because it says it does. A system will always act to preserve itself first. Your personal interests and the system's interests are not always aligned. This doesn't mean you have to go live off the grid. It simply means you must navigate the world with your eyes wide open, using the rules to your advantage when you can, and protecting yourself when you can't. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes loudly. The financial tricks that kept a Roman citizen broke are the exact same mechanisms draining your bank account today. They're just hidden in complex jargon, digital algorithms, and 1,000-page budgets. The only difference, the only thing that has ever changed, is whether you recognize the trick in time. This is a lot to take in, I know, but understanding the problem is the first, most powerful step toward solving it. My question for you is this. After seeing these historical patterns, what's one small thing you'll start doing differently to build your own financial resilience? Let me know in the comments below. I read them all. Music fades in, Host gives a warm, encouraging smile. And if this perspective was helpful and gave you a new way to look at things, consider subscribing for more. We're here to understand the rules of the game together. Thanks for watching.